When Mark asked me, God, I think earlier this year, if not late last year, to kind of do something around containers on ZOS, the story was very, very simple. We kind of knew what was coming. We had the roadmap. By this time, we'd say, hey, we've got to launch, and all wonderful things have happened. Something happened kind of mid-year to kind of third quarter time frame that gives us 34 billion reasons to bring something else into the equation. All right, so I'm going to do a presentation of really two parts. First of all, I'm kind of going to go into containers on ZOS, all right, which is kind of what the original hook was to kind of bring you in here. And then we're going to look a little bit more about some of the stuff that's happening generally across Z overall. So we'll do a bit of a containers come to Z as well. All right, so why are we talking about containers? Why are we talking about, container technology in the space of ZOS? Is this just kind of another Me Too kind of conversation, or is there something really kind of special here? So what I want to take you through, hopefully, is that we have got something pretty cool in this space. And if I could work out how to actually advance these charts, not right to the end that one was. Oh, come on, guys. All right, so you're now going to see, rewind the presentation. There we go. And how the hell do you go forward? Yes! Amazing. All right, so what I'm going to take you through is really why containers on ZOS make a heck of a lot of sense, why a lot of our clients now are starting to look at container technology and really trying to amalgamate that with their hybrid cloud journey. And kind of the real key to the whole conversation is the hybrid cloud journey. So as we know, and probably a lot of you have had the conversation around things like Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Are you all familiar with things like Chapter 1, Chapter 2? No, that's just awesome. That's great. All right, so Chapter 1 of people's journey to the cloud was very much around the type of application that clients could take to the cloud. All right, the very simple kind of touch interface, changing a web-based application to an iPhone application, changing a 3270 to a web-based to an iPhone application, doing some level of magic with AI, but fundamentally moving a certain type of application into the cloud. About 20% or so of clients were able to kind of do that or go on that journey, and 20% or so of that workload was kind of moving. The rest of the workload is different. The rest of the workload is different in many different characteristics. One of those characteristics is mission critical stuff. All right, so a lot of clients are not necessarily keen to move the mission critical workload into the cloud day one. Let's see how the rest of the journey progresses. AI starting to become more ingrained in core mission critical applications now. That's complex stuff. People are trying to work out the use cases, etc. There are other workloads that don't necessarily make a great deal of sense to move into the cloud as is. They need some level of modernization, maybe putting RESTful services around them, whatever it may be. But there's really kind of these journey phases, Chapter 1, Chapter 2. Chapter 1, very much the early foray there. Chapter 2, very much about the next wave of applications to kind of go into the cloud. And fundamentally what clients are finding, they're finding, I don't really just want to lift, rewrite everything and move everything to the cloud, because that takes a level of skill, that takes a level of time, that takes a level of re-architecture, re-engineering, etc. Wouldn't it be great if I could take the assets that I've already got in the organization, enable them for the cloud, and then build the new business application functionality into the cloud, potentially, the new interface into the cloud. So we start to generate this kind of concept of hybrid cloud, where there's a relevance of the workload you've got today, hopefully running on the mainframe, running on your on-premise applications, etc., and linking that to the next phase of the cloud-based applications. Leveraging cloud-based, cloud-native development techniques and kind of meeting in the middle to generate that next wave of application. So what a lot of clients, where they are right now, they're undertaking the journey, they're starting to see, well, I've got assets on the mainframe, I've got assets on-premise, I want to reuse, and I want to bring these together. So that's part of the journey that they're currently undergoing. What that's generating is a lot of interest around, it's around skills, it's around orchestration, it's around manageability, it's around that new hybrid application. I have to manage it in a certain way. I don't want to manage certain parts of it in a typical Z way. I don't want to manage certain parts of it in a typical cloud way. I want some form of consistent orchestration and management. The common currency for that type of conversation is containers. So really where containers come in is how this journey, helping support this cloud-based journey, this journey to the cloud-based application. Containers is a part of the currency that enables that to happen. Okay? So many clients at different stages, many clients are thinking about what it is they need to do, technologies they need to kind of base on. And where we're going to go with ZOS is very much to kind of embrace that container technology. Embrace that capability of being able to put things together for a certain purpose and have that portable around the organization, portable around their platforms, etc., to get a whole new level of business functionality out of the platform and out of the applications they build. If you look at ZOS to a certain extent, it probably was not the most renowned agile platform on this planet. As clients would say, hey, vote for your top 5 agile platforms, ZOS was pretty much probably down the bottom of that list, even if it ever made the top 5. So clients are being challenged with agility of the platform. What does that really mean? Availability of things like open source tools coming to ZOS, availability of DevOps pipelines, availability of that whole way of the way cloud applications are built. Not necessarily immediately those technologies are available in abundance at all on the platform. So our goal is to extend the ZOS ecosystem, extend the ZOS environment to be embracing of those technologies where they fit. And this is going to be very much a conversation of where they fit. Okay? This is not, hey, let's bring everything to the platform, let's enable everything and have you go have at it. This is, let's give you some guidance as to what fits in a container on the platform, what fits in a container that may want to run somewhere else, and try and give you some guidelines as to kind of how this all kind of works out. So the first part of the conversation is going to be really all about these containers coming to ZOS. You'll know that we're not probably the greatest organization in coming up with great trendy names. So, ZOS container extensions. All right, this is new in ZOS 2.4. ZOS 2.4 was fully available, generally available on September the 30th this year. So we're out about 6 weeks or so now. But ZOS container extensions is really about extending that container ecosystem into the realm of ZOS itself, allowing you to bring container-based workloads, Linux on Z-based workloads, and co-locate them with ZOS applications. Interesting scenario this. Why would you want to bring those applications together? You clearly don't want to bring them together if they have no affinity with each other, if they have no relationship with each other. But a lot of workloads these days, particularly in hybrid cloud worlds, have affinity with each other. The application wants to be close to the data. I want to use microservices. I want to use technology with my ZOS-based data that is not available on ZOS, but I really need to kind of bring it close into the ecosystem. I'm going to go through a few scenarios over the next few minutes of where you might want to think that this actually is applicable. So let's kind of hop through just a few moments on terminology. Now, the purists out there of you on containers, etc., may disagree with some of these pieces, but ultimately I just want to try and net this down. Containers are not necessarily generic containers. Containers go everywhere, etc. There are horses for courses. There are various platform-specific natures of some of these containers. But typically, you would expect Windows containers to run typically within a Windows ecosystem. Linux containers typically running within the Linux ecosystem, although I think we can actually run those within kind of the Windows 10 space these days. Linux on Z containers, which is essentially what we're talking about here, typically run within the Linux on Z space, whether it's in a Linux 1 machine or whether it's on a set of specialty processors sat within partitions within a ZOS environment or a main Z environment, or now within the ZCX environment. And ZOS containers specifically would, if they existed, probably run on ZOS. And there's a reason that I kind of tee that up there. Okay, because one of the things that we're clearly looking at is how do we bring that whole concept of containers, managing your workload, building them into manageable units, how do we bring that to all the workloads that we have on the platform? So I'm not going to say any more about ZOS containers specifically, other than let's have a conversation in a year's time. Because there's some real interesting thoughts that we've got in that space. How can we help you with containers for the rest of your ZOS ecosystem, your KICS and IMS and MQ and WebSphere, etc.? How can we help you with that kind of concept there? But we're going to focus particularly on Linux on Z containers. Question? Can you take questions as you go? Or do you want of course, questions, fire them up.
So since we're going to leave the topic of ZOS containers, I thought I might ask if the Z containers are still going to be relevant in a year's time.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So if you think about, and again, we'll use the word containers a little interchangeably. So ZOS containers, all intents and purposes, as I said, if it fundamentally existed, the thoughts that we've got are you want to kind of wrap in a manageable unit a set of your ZOS subsystems. All right, if you want to do that, all right, that would be, very much a kind of separate conversation at the moment, because there's different nuances there of how kind of things would want to work together. Because don't forget, one of the big things with containers is things like Kubernetes, handling kind of workloads, balancing workloads out, etc. In the ZOS workloads, we've got something called Workload Manager. All right, we would need to make sure that things kind of work together. All right, so let's look at Linux on Z containers specifically. Those, it's not a whole new ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that exists out there at the moment. I did a quick poll just before this. There's 2,764 available images of workloads that can kind of come to Linux on Z right now. Okay, and that means they can come to Linux on Z within kind of a ZCX environment right now. That will continue to evolve. And you're going to hear, hopefully in the next few charts, etc., how we're going to further help accelerate clients building their own containers that can run in this space. It's for a certain type of workload, which is why, absolutely, we think this will continue to grow as part of the ecosystem. We know from a ZOS perspective, all the ISVs out there, the business partners out there, even ourselves, IBM development, we would love to bring everything to ZOS. We would love a native build on ZOS. We see the value in terms of doing that. We see the acceleration. We see the integration there. But from a pure mechanics perspective, economics perspective, it's not always the right thing to do. Okay? So we'll always see a little bit of this kind of hybrid environment kind of ensuing and kind of working together. So that's why, yes, I think those ecosystems will continue to work and grow, even in line with other kind of ecosystems and containers, etc., growing on the platform as well. I think the key thing is almost what I'm going to be tapping on that second part there. It's what is a container? What will a container be? Typically today we talk about Docker. All right, that's the almost standard out there that everybody kind of resonates with and refers to. Well, the Open Container Initiative is now growing very, very rapidly. And I think what we're going to start to see is us transition away from talking about Docker to talking about OCI. Okay? That's, I think, where we need to focus, not only as we go through ZCX and more of the capabilities that come into ZCX, but as we go on to other containerized technologies that we bring to the platform. Okay? Does that help? Super. All right. Again, down the bottom there, there's a ton of things on S390X, etc., on Docker Hub at the moment that you can kind of lift and bring over to run on ZOS within the environment that we have created. So what is the environment that we've created? So traditionally, ZOS has been about running mixed language application servers, general application servers within multiple address spaces, etc., and kind of growing the platform. We know ZOS, etc., is the best platform on which to run Java. All right, Java runs its best on the mainframe. We then kind of brought some of those Unix system services to kind of allow us to bring more and more capability to help modernize the platform. We went through that kind of journey over the last number of years, etc. And the space that we're moving into now is really allowing us to bring the next wave of workloads, the next wave of application sets, etc., or tools or capabilities into the ecosystem as well. So ZCX, ZOS Container Extensions, is essentially an address space. It's an address space that is going to run within the ZOS ecosystem. Workload Manager is going to know about it. We're going to be able to allocate resources to it. We won't be able to go inside the containers with Workload Manager, but we'll be able to allocate resources to it. And it's going to be for certain types of workloads that typically we wouldn't expect to run natively on the platform. Let's think of NoSQL databases, maybe Mongo or something like that. Maybe some web servers, maybe even WebSphere to a certain extent, even though it actually runs natively on ZOS. Could be a bunch of interesting kind of tools there. We could be bringing GitHub in, we could be bringing a DevOps process in, Jenkins, Maven, that type of pipeline activity to run within a container. As long as it's packaged as a Linux on Z container, then we will be able to bring it into the ecosystem. Now, the environment that we're creating here is fundamentally an address space that will run containers within it. Typically, here's a data point for you. The new Z15, when we did trials and tests of the Z15 and extrapolated some of the performance numbers, we found that on a fully loaded, essentially a fully loaded Linux one, 190 cores, etc., we could run about 2.4 million containers on a new Z15, a single Z15. That's not what we're talking about here with ZCX. We're going to be running tens, probably, of containers within a ZCX address space. We're not going to be running hundreds of thousands of containers. It's not going to be bring a small lightweight container and throw it in, stand it up, and kind of go crazy that way. It's going to be about certain workloads and specific workloads that have an affinity to ZOS. And I can't emphasize that piece enough. So what benefit are we going to have by bringing container workloads and running them and co-locating them next to ZOS applications or ZOS databases? Okay, fundamentally, if they work together, there's an advantage there from, let's say, workload modernization. Bringing some of the new tools, bringing these open source tools, open source development tools, DevOps tools or DevSecOps tools into the ecosystem so that you can start to build out the next generation of application development platform. That would be a great use of bringing those tools into a container and running within ZCX. Other, let's say, technologies, let me throw a few examples. There's a lot of clients now who are looking at things like Kafka. Okay, and where's Kafka sitting at the moment? It could be potentially sitting in a Linux on Z space. It could be sitting outbound. We can bring that in, and some clients are looking at bringing those kind of capabilities into a ZCX container. There are other technologies out there, maybe Aspera. Aspera is an IBM product for doing fast data management and data throughput, etc., that may be able to accentuate GDPS. All right, allowing you to do better disaster recovery and better kind of active-active scenarios. So we think there's a bunch of technology out there that actually, if you brought it and co-located it with ZOS workloads, could really accelerate the value of those workloads on the platform. Clearly, a number of things concern us. It has to perform, it has to be a good fit, and it has to run within, shall we say, the value of the platform. We'll be able to kind of build on the value of the platform. One of the things that I was talking to a client earlier in the year, and we talked about ZCX, and they immediately thought of, in the way that they do disaster recovery and backup, etc., very much a GDPS scenario. They have a lot of links out to NoSQL, MongoDB, etc., Postgres, all that type of kind of capability, and they're sat out in the distributed world. Their ZOS applications are critically dependent on them, but they're sat outbound because that's where they have to sit. As they do levels of recovery, what they want to be able to do is to capture everything that is running in the ZOS environment and trickle it out to their recovery site. For anything that's sitting outside of the ZOS ecosystem, that's more difficult to do. They have to put business processes in place to do that. So if they can bring those workloads in, run them within a container, guess what? This is all backed up into vSAM. vSAM is part of a recovery unit, etc., and we'll be able to kind of allow them to do better GDPS kind of recovery, active-active or active-passive scenarios as necessary. So some clients looking at, well, I can bring those outlying systems into the ZOS ecosystem, and now I can do some of my better processes. Fundamentally, for some clients, it'll allow them to get time to value of their applications quicker. Again, there could be technologies that are not available on ZOS that they just need. Could be web services, could be also kind of microservices, could be enabled and could be available in a ZCX container that their core applications can leverage through RESTful services. So lots of interesting scenarios there that clients are looking at as to why this would be valuable to them. Typical use cases, expanding the ecosystem. Pretty much I've talked about that. Different types of databases, different types of technologies that are not necessarily on ZOS, nor are going to go through a porting effort to move them to ZCX. That's very much kind of one of the main kind of goals here. Systems management, we co-announced, when we launched this, we co-announced with our SMU, Service Management Unite Suite. They have their product now available as a container, and they can run co-located with the ZOS workloads. And again, DevOps tools. It's a very rapid way to stand up your DevOps ecosystem co-located to your ZOS environment and run in a very integrated fashion. We have done a bunch of performance assessments on this already, okay? And there's a lot of kind of key aspects that I wanted to articulate that are important to us, which fundamentally are clearly important to you. Performance. How does this perform? Overall, and you can see more details about this, Jerry Stevens has got a presentation tomorrow, I think it's 10:45 tomorrow, on the real deep dive around ZCX. But overall, we're seeing really good performance characteristics of, if you are running on a Linux on Z address space on the same machine, and you want to, and you're talking over to maybe to DB2, or you're talking vice versa between those address spaces, if you co-located this in ZCX, we're seeing 25, maybe 30% performance improvement. Okay, we're seeing a reduction of network traffic, of course, because we're kind of talking across address space. And one of the other core interesting things, the workload here we're enabling for zip offloadability. Okay, so all those zips that hopefully you've got, maybe if you're using them all, great. If you're not using them all and you've got some spare capacity there, these workloads coming into the ZCX environment are going to be able to utilize that zip capacity. Question?
Question that when you were giving the percentage performance improvement, that was presumably compared to Linux sort of sitting by the side, like in an LPAR. Was that with SMCP and all the latest low latency stuff?
Double check that with Jerry if you tend to go and attend his session tomorrow. But yes, we fundamentally, we're trying to measure the value of co-location. All right. So if those workloads are talking, rather than just sitting a workload in a Linux on Z address space, LPAR, etc., if it has affinity, then we're going to measure it of where it is today. If it ran in ZCX, and we're seeing about, I say, 25, maybe 30% performance improvement of transaction rates, etc., response times are improved. So that's the kind of comparison we're doing. We're not going to do a comparison of, if I'm just running a Linux on Z application, it's not talking to ZOS, it's not no intention of talking to ZOS, and then I say, right, I'll now run that same workload in ZCX. You're clearly going to see there's going to be some overhead to run it in ZCX.
So I'd be interested in seeing that, because SMCD, of course, is the underlying memory piece of ABOS. So
Yeah,
I'm highly outlined already.
Right. So check with Jerry. So Jerry will certainly have been involved in some of the performance measurements that we've done. We're still going through some level of the performance because we've got some low-hanging fruit we've identified already. We can make this even faster. We've made some changes already in things like ComServer to improve kind of the connectivity, and we've seen some really very encouraging results through doing this. Okay, so performance is key. Utilizing engines, clearly clients are probably worried about, if I put a container into ZCX, is it going to burn GPs? All right. I'm going to say it will take some GP cycles because this is an address space. The address space needs to be dispatched, etc. So it will take some cycles, but it's very, 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 very small in terms of the overall consumption of what is typically normal for a workload. In terms of management of this, and one of the things that I said right at the start, this is about helping orchestration and management of workloads. It's about using technologies and capabilities that are used out there in kind of the cloud native space. One of those technologies that's being used there very fundamentally is Kubernetes. We issued a statement of direction in May of this year that although not at the GA, we would bring a Kubernetes kind of infrastructure to this environment relatively rapidly. So that is still our plan, and hopefully in the early part of next year, then you'll see us deliver on that statement of direction. It is key for us. We do have things like Google Swarm out of the box, but clearly that's interesting, but most clients now are looking at Kubernetes or something like OpenShift, etc., and we'll show you how that's evolving as well. Interesting thing here, and Marna actually mentioned it in her session, there is a prereq here. You do need a hardware feature code to enable this. Why? Because we're running within secure containers. All right, so the containers that you have stood up within the address space, you can't get into. They're secure. You're going to use things like Docker CLI, etc., if you need to get into those and kind of manage the workloads within. But we can't see what's going on inside those containers. So we use our secure services containers technology, and that requires a hardware feature code. But fundamentally, this technology, there is no option, feature code, this, that, and the other. It's all part of z/OS 2.4. We do try and help you in terms of determining whether the workloads are a good fit to put in ZCX. Fundamentally, is the modernization of z/OS applications by allowing access to an open source ecosystem, etc., is that of value? If you want to use open source tools, etc., and it's valuable to you to bring them and co-locate them in, then that's another good reason to do this. Do you have existing open source or Linux that you want to manage within z/OS? I think it's probably more fundamental to say, what are the workloads that don't necessarily fit within here? So we give you a guidance as to what really helps and what really comes in. Key is, if it's got affinity to z/OS workloads, that's probably the number one kind of capability. What doesn't necessarily fit? All right. If you're running those applications natively under Z, and there really is kind of no chatter, there's no need to kind of converse over. Fundamentally, don't start to move Java on z/OS out into a container. Java on z/OS is tuned for the platform. It's tuned inside the platform, etc. For software that's running natively on z/OS, I did mention WebSphere a little earlier. We did have one client who said, hey, this is brilliant, because I can take all my WebSphere z/OS workload and now I can put it in a container. And you go, you are running 60 billion transactions a month. This is not for that, all right? z/OS, WebSphere z/OS is the place to run those workloads, all right? But fundamentally, if you have got typically, maybe you've got applications or other data sources that have that affinity, have that connection to z/OS or to workloads running on z/OS. That's where you get the real sweet spot here. It's not about taking things off z/OS and putting them in a container. All right? So I can't emphasize that enough. Because you won't see the same performance. All right? Very honestly, you won't see the same performance if you take a well-tuned application on z/OS and you put it in a container. I doubt you'll see anywhere near the same performance, because that's not what it was created for. Okay, Ed Jaffe, who I think is floating around the conference this week, mentioned and gave us a beautiful quote. He says, suppose your z/OS resident application wants access to microservices that runs on Linux. Do you want the request to go off the platform, across the interface you don't necessarily trust, into systems whose performance characteristics you don't necessarily understand, and whose maintenance schedules and downtime philosophies might not align with yours? Absolutely, great statement. Or would you prefer bulletproof, secure, z/OS performance and infrastructure behind that microservice, so you know where it will be, guaranteed? And Ed Jaffe is a total supporter. And we've got a whole bunch of people. We did a managed beta program as part of z/OS 2.4. We had a bunch of clients. We had about 24 clients that were running on z/OS 2.4 beta program, ESP program, And the majority of them, some 20 of them, actually played around with and did some work within ZCX. It's starting to resonate. Once we get the kind of use cases out there, it's starting to really resonate in terms of what the value is here. And as we look at the performance numbers and we continue to iterate and to continue to tweak, we see the real value of what this can bring. Now, we don't necessarily just want to leave clients out there and say 2,700 Docker items, images, etc. on Docker Hub is it. We want to give you some tooling and capability to create your own containers. Ambitus, not necessarily a name that rolls off the tongue. It's one of those open mainframe projects that we've been able to create with the open mainframe team. So it is something where we're providing a set of tools out there and allowing you and helping you to bring new applications, new open source projects into ZCX and to have them run incredibly well. We've been playing around with things like Grafana, Jupyter Hub, etc., and Portainer, some of those technologies that you would typically use with kind of container-based implementations. And we're seeing, again, some very encouraging results from a performance perspective, from a doability capability perspective, and from overall consumability. This is natural stuff. This is not in any way a different flavor of Docker. It's not in any way a different flavor of the way that containers would run. This is, you bring a pure Docker container, Linux on Z environment, and you put it within here, and you do not need to change it at all. Okay, I did mention ZOS 2.4, and with every ZOS audience, they do say, well, could we move this back to 2.3? The answer is no. We're not going to do that. One of the directions that we've got with 2.4 is actually, I will say it's a rock-solid platform. It's a rock-solid ESP that we have gone through. Why? Because we've been doing and dropping out parts of ZOS 2.4 certainly over the last almost 2 years. We call it continuous delivery. So you've been seeing parts of it kind of come out. The ZCX work, there's some specific stuff that really went into the core of the OS here and into some of the firmware activity that we did with our Secure Services Container team. And so it really is, it would be I think it would be a destabilizing fact on 2.3 if we lifted something the size of this and we took it back. And the last thing you as ZOS clients want is destabilization of the platform. So my take is we won't be doing this. Container extension workloads, zip eligible. We're seeing through some performance examples, around 90, 92 or so offloadability, which is good. And again, there is a prereq hardware level here, and that's Z15 or Z14. Why? Because again, we use secure service containers, and Z14 was the platform in terms of where we basically announced that and brought that through. So very simple, very straightforward requirements, and a lot of clients really starting to get up to speed with this as rapidly as we wanted. Just a quick word on 2.4, because clearly a lot of you will look at it, oh, it's 2.4 and I can't possibly do anything with this for about another 3 years. Hopefully the consumption model of 2.4 is clearly better than previous releases. As I say, from a rock-solid perspective, we're incredibly happy with the way the early support program has gone. We had about 24 clients on this overall. 16 clients are already. When the data was cut here, it was probably about a month ago. 16 are already in full production, and 10 are in full production with mission-critical applications. So we're pretty happy with the way ZOS 2.4 is kind of set up. And just to give you some insight into the rest of the OS, we're going to continue the continuous delivery kind of mentality and cadence. That's where you'll get Kubernetes support for ZCX. Will come out as one of the continuous delivery drops. We'll be adding that in there as well. That's our mentality, because we think that kind of aligns up with the mentality that you want to be able to consume what we can do as an operating system. Okay, shameless plug, Jerry's session 10:15 to 11:15 in Stowe, session EG tomorrow, if you want the real deep dive, deep guts in terms of how this kind of stands up. Some context for you here. So we've got the ecosystem. That's very much the Ambitus work. We've got Gary Pushkov, who's very much the architect, together with Gus Kasimis on this, and the best brain at GSE UK is probably Jerry, and I've already mentioned he's doing a session tomorrow. One thing we've tried to do with ZCX is to change the way that you learn about it, change the way that you experience it and you can get on board with it. I'd encourage you to visit the new Content Solutions site, which is how we're trying to change the way that we deliver information for you to consume some of our newer capability. We've created very much a single topic within Content Solutions about ZCX, about essentially following a crawl, walk, run model to allow you, what are the first things that you need to do? Then how do you stand up your first ZCX container? How do you then manage it? How do you then kind of scale it? So trying to take you through or away from the typical, here's a red book, go read it, or here's a set of things in Knowledge Center, etc. Here's an orchestrated way that we can kind of get you up to speed. Again, it's about consumability, and it's about you being able to do and use our new stuff as rapidly as you possibly can. We're not going to throw roadblocks in your way. We're going to show you some new ways to do things, hopefully streamlined ways to do things. So let's look at the part 2 of this. This is the bit that wasn't necessarily planned when Mark and myself spoke. This is the stuff that is coming thick and fast. And whatever I tell you today, probably in about a week's time, will have changed and evolved even more. Because I said there's 34 or however many billion reasons there were for us to kind of bring in Red Hat. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the value of Red Hat come and change what we do on the platform, and bringing the value of what Red Hat kind of provides in terms of the stack of capabilities that they provide. And we're looking at how we can bring them rapidly to the Z platform. So if we think about kind of the overall kind of hybrid cloud journey, then we know that what I've done highlighted here are, if you amalgamate kind of that cloud platform space of everything that was wonderful and is wonderful about the cloud, it's agile, it's open, it's all about self-service, and skills are never an issue because they're coming out of college thick and fast. You amalgamate that with the value and the platform value that we have with Z, availability, control, reliability, and security, you end up with one pretty solid kind of platform on which to build. Now, you also end up with a platform that's got many different ways of doing a hybrid cloud platform that's got many different ways of managing and orchestrating and balancing and workload balancing, etc. So one of the values, one of the multitude of values that Red Hat is kind of bringing here is shaping our head as to how the mainframe needs to play in key spaces like management and orchestration. So management of the workloads and orchestration of those workloads. We shouldn't, and we should be very careful that we don't provide a different way to do stuff on Z than is done elsewhere in the organization. There is a key goal, and there is a clear mantra that we have in this whole cloud-native developer environment and management environment, and that's really to remove the Z-ness. Remove the Z-ness in a good way. Remove the Z-ness to say, you don't need to know what's underlying. You just need to know that whatever you put this on, and if you choose to put this on Z, it's going to be available, controllable, secure, and reliable. You get all those ilities and those all kind of capabilities that we've known and loved for years. You get those inherent with where you choose to put this workload. But the way that you put that workload there is no different than how you would put a workload on any other platform. So we want to bring this, take the Z-ness out of management and orchestration, and really help you streamline how you deploy applications and how you deploy systems and you deploy containers, etc. So what we're doing is we're leveraging the Red Hat synergy. We're leveraging the fact that OpenShift is becoming almost abundant out there with clients. Many clients that we've talked to are saying, yep, if we've got Red Hat, we're using OpenShift. It's a key area for us. We have clients clearly on the Kubernetes journey, and then we clearly have them in some in the middle as well, because there's that kind of linkage between Kubernetes and OpenShift. There's a level of Kubernetes within the OpenShift kind of ecosystem and environment. So we clearly want to bring OpenShift to the Z environment so that we can manage it in a coherent and consistent way. We want to emphasize the fact that Cloud native, you should be doing things one way versus doing things in many different ways dependent on the platform on which kind of the target platform on which they go to. And we should be leveraging containers. Okay? So it's a different way of looking at the conversation, but it's saying let's look top down in the organization and make sure everything looks consistent. We're managing, orchestrating things in a very, very simple way. Now, if you look at, I mentioned this cloud journey. And so this cloud journey, and we talk about the multiple chapters, but as you go through those multiple chapters, as you look at really what's behind somebody's journey to the cloud, it's very much about which workloads, on the advice, which workloads make sense to move into the cloud, which workloads make sense to kind of leave where they are. How do I move the various pieces? How do I then kind of create this build environment, and then how do I ultimately manage it? So what IBM's doing, and we've announced this through a statement of direction, we're bringing these things called cloud packs to the platform. Cloud packs, fundamentally, pre-configured containers with capability that we can bring to the platform to allow you to accelerate your cloud journey. Allow you to accelerate use of those pieces that are already in place, but allow you to accelerate maybe your application development environment, your data management, your overall integration, how you automate things, and how you manage your multiple clouds out there, all built on kind of an OpenShift stack and an OpenShift kind of technology base. So to give you an idea of these sorts of things, I've mentioned containerized software running on a consistent platform, but let's look at cloud packs for applications, very much around developer tools, modernization tools, etc., frameworks and runtimes. All these will be coming essentially to the Z environment. Now, we've made the announcement already that these are coming. What's the target of where these are going? These typically will go into the Linux on Z environment, either running essentially on the platform or in a Linux One space. Okay? Now, you could also look at saying, well, hang on, would these go into ZCX? Yes, at a point in time. And what I mean by that is, at the moment, ZCX is essentially running a different flavor of Linux than Red Hat. And it's not SUSE either. All right? So we have a little bit of a journey to do ourselves, certainly within the secure service container space. Shall we say we are being actively encouraged to move fast? To kind of, and this is why I say, if you ask me in a week or so, maybe the story's a little bit different. But fundamentally, we expect to, from a Z perspective, from a secure service container perspective, from a ZCX perspective, we expect to be able to pretty rapidly host Red Hat distro level and everything that essentially comes with Red Hat in the ZCX ecosystem. That makes logical sense. That absolutely is where we kind of need to head. And once we've done that, then you can be looking at cloud packs being applicable to run within those environments as well. So again, we don't want to make Z different. We don't want to make the way that you manage it or orchestrate it different. We need to leverage things like OpenShift. We need to leverage things like Ansible. We need to leverage things like Ansible Towers, etc. There are some pieces that we need to fix on the platform first before some of those come. But ask me again, if we do this session in a year, if we do this session probably in 3 months' time, there will be just more stuff here. There will be more statements of direction delivered, and probably even more statements of direction that we've announced in terms of how rapidly we're going to get to this space. So I'm out of development, and I know what our engineering teams are doing, and believe me, we've all got a Red Hat on. All right, so you can kind of see where we're heading. So that's kind of giving you the idea of not only where we're heading from a ZCX perspective and the capability that we've got, also gives you a little bit of insight that when we planned this session, we weren't necessarily have the crispness around it, but now gives you a little bit of insight in where we're going with things like cloud packs. Now, there is one thing I do have to do before I end this, and that's announce that we have an IBM Z Day that's going up on the 21st of November. It's a one-day virtual conference. There's industry speakers and all sorts, and there is a way to register there. But putting all this into context, we're very focused on driving skills on the platform. We very much know, as soon as I came into the conference, I met with the RSM partners, you know, about, are you aging out of the business and this, that, and the other, and you look at yourself and you go, is that about me? All right. But we know about skills. So we're trying to address skills, clearly applicability to the platform. That's why we're opening up the platform, open source, and bringing those sorts of technologies to the platform, whether it's ZCX or whether it's kind of bringing Red Hat to the platform, etc. We're opening that up. We're using, you know, things like Zoe. You familiar with Zoe? So hopefully a lot of nods there, and there's a bunch of nods there. Zoe is about simplifying the way that you interact with the platform and using open source technologies, etc. We've got to bring things like Python, and we've got to bring things like Go. We've got to bring things, a lot of those technologies that either yourselves or the developers you work with or the sysprogs you work with, etc., know and love on maybe other platforms. We need to bring those to Z, because we need to make sure that this platform is no different in terms of accessibility, different in terms of skills, but it is different in terms of security. It is different in terms of reliability, and it is different in terms of kind of scalability, etc. So that's where we're focused. We are on an incredibly rapid journey right now. I have never seen the ZOS organization kind of move this fast, which is a good thing, all right? And I think we're absolutely heading in the right direction. So I'm super excited about where we're heading. Hopefully you share a level of that excitement about what you see in this conference going on in the next 3 days. There's some cool stuff on this platform. There really is. Okay? If there's any questions?
Dave,
yes?
Slightly different question. With more workload coming onto ZOS,
yeah,
and a lot of being offloaded to zips, do you see IBM changing the 1 CP to 2 zip ratio?
Good question. I think ZCX is bringing different patterns. Okay, it's bringing different ways of attracting more workload to the platform. I think at some point in time we would probably have to change. But again, more than happy to have offline conversations. But again, watch this space. I think reality will suggest we have to change some of the aspects and restrictions. Yes, that's a good point to bring up. Very good point to bring up. Any other questions? Who's planning? Who's looking at ZCX? That's about 3 or 4 hands gone up. All right. So by all means.
Question for you. Is it likely to change WLM to support microservices going into this address space? So you can give this address space a priority?
So workload management is an interesting aspect. I think if you look at ZCX, so workload manager will be aware of the containers. Workload manager right now, and for the short-term future, still won't know what's in those containers. So won't be able to balance or prioritize anything within those containers. I think when workload, and well, it's very difficult for us to get into those containers and because you know, secure service containers as well, and there's a whole kind of premise there. I think if and when we move into ZOS native workloads, into some form of kind of container structure, there absolutely has to be some interaction between things like Kubernetes and Workload Manager. All right, because the last thing you want is for one to run against the other. We know we balance workloads incredibly well with Workload Manager. There is an incredible amount of innovation and skill and a lot of spaghetti code inside Workload Manager. And you know, Colin, you've been very close to it. It does what it says on the tin, and it does it incredibly well. We don't need some other orchestration tool moving workload out willy-nilly, and the two kind of need to integrate. So if we integrate into a Helm chart, who knows? Well, that's work that we're looking at right now.
There's an open standard now for tagging transactions with what you would in the ZOS term think of as WLM related stuff. So transaction times and ownership and tagging times and going through and how many and so on. So you know, if I was doing it, then integrating that on the ZOS side with the tagging into the appropriate WLM service part
So is that the work that was done for things like APM, Application Performance Management, so you could see
I don't know.
all the way
I'm
through?
from knowing the open source stuff and the Linux stuff and the open standards. And
Okay, all right.
But I don't know internally to IBM, if anybody's been looking.
So there's a piece of work that we did to allow, because you think about the whole RESTful services space, we used to have a deficiency in being able to track that workload once it came in and once it went to a RESTful service and then what transactions it went to, and you wanted to be able to do the complete Splunk or App Dynamics kind of view of that application. We did a bunch of changes there to allow that workload IDs, et cetera, to be kind of passed all the way down the pipe. I'm not aware of the open source capability there, but I will go pass that back to the teams doing the APM space. It's an open standard, sorry. Okay. I'll go pass that back to the team and just see if they're aware of it. No, but what you're saying is if we had that, then we could be into the Linux transaction and et cetera. Yeah. Okay, thanks guys.